Hello people and welcome back. This is part 3 of our sculpting tutorial. This is where we left off last time. Last time we did our first pass, we did the pose, we did the blocking, and then I did a quick render, and this is how far we got. So it's still at an early stage, but I think we already have something that feels solid. We have our proportions. I think looking back, this part of the arm is a bit too long. I'm gonna shorten it, change a bit the angle of the hand, but I think we already have something that feels good. Now that we did the blocking, the next step is gonna be to start to design the form. For now, we created a bunch of forms, but we were really focusing on trying to more on the proportion on the pose and just putting forms to make sure that we're having this. We didn't concentrate on really having a nice silhouette and having things that feel really good and having proper forms. So now we're gonna get in that aspect of sculpting. So how we're gonna do this. First, I'm gonna introduce new concepts that are gonna be useful for us to create these next steps, and then we're gonna go back in ZBrush and modify this. So the first concept that I wanted to bring up was form language. Now, form language is like the holy grail of sculpting. Like if your sculpt doesn't work, that's because of form language. If you want to improve, form language. If you want to form language, it's so how I perceive form language is how the form is um, how the form expresses itself. So if we can really compare form language to any language really. So when someone is speaking, they express their thought through their language. Now, when you're looking at someone in their form, anatomy speaks through its form language. So what you really want to learn, you're learning anatomy to learn how it influences the language. It's like learning words to be able to make sentences. So it's useful, but at some point you need to wrap it up in this idea of form language. And just like any language, it's you can't really learn it just in textbooks. You need to start speaking it to try, and it takes a long time to do it. And so if we're looking at a sculpture, if the person is able to speak the form language that we're used to seeing in humans, we're gonna say that it's realistic. And so slowly and surely, we're gonna build our understanding of form language by looking at references and trying to understand how does just like we spoke before, I brought a bunch of references that we're I have a some sort of mess of words and stuff over here. We're gonna try to make sense of this. But if we're looking at a reference, there is a way that folds create themselves. There's a way that muscles group themselves together through skin. There's a way that tendons feels. There's a way that the skin quality has a certain feeling. So, and form language is always different. It's different between female, between male, old people, young people. So it's like it's this really huge topic that encompasses the whole of the form. So let's not expect to learn the whole thing by watching a couple of references and then just applying it. It's always a work in progress. But in the past year, I tried to break down foreign language in three tools that I use when I sculpt. And so I'm gonna share that with you guys. These are the flows, the amplitude, and the identity. This is the three tools that I use to when I'm sculpting. This is how I reflect on my form and how I try to critique everything. So it might also be useful for you guys. I already made a post on ArtStation about this. Um, I talked about it before, but if you haven't read it, you can go read that. It talks about flow, amplitude, and identity, but I'm gonna try to push the discussion a bit further here and try to talk about it again. So the idea is that let's just start by speaking about flows. So flow in itself, it's like every single point is gonna be like a big topic. I hope I won't take like 30 hours speaking about this, but let's use the diagram that I created before. So flow is the idea that every single form that you create has a certain direction. And when you put them together, there is again a direction to it. So let's say we just take abstract forms together. We can see they all have, with their silhouette, you can feel a certain direction to them. In the way they twist on themselves, you can feel a certain twisting. Like you can understand that motion that is going through the form. And now, when you put them together, you're changing that flow. So let's say we just put the green block with the blue block, then you have a clean and a soft direction, a continuous flow between the two. Now, when you add the red block to it, you're adding a certain connection going from the back of the green block to the front of the blue. And that's when you turn your shape, you're going to feel that connection all the way around your form. And you're going to see that on you're once you like that red block, you're going to start seeing it everywhere on your human anatomy. Like this is you're going to have this red block on your shoulder. This is pretty easy to see that it's a forearm. You're going to see it on your legs. There is always this connective tissue that you're going to have to connect your forms together to make them solid. And if we reflect about this as if it was bending, as if it's an arm and it starts bending, you see you see very often when people make an arm and it's bending, you're gonna have, let's say we just take this is the green block and this is the blue block, let's say the arm is bent, you're gonna see very often that people are gonna sculpt it just like this. So you're gonna have the flow of your form is all gonna connect around like this point where both of your forms have this like really thin point in their flows. So the motion that you're seeing with the form is that the forearm is going towards the elbow like this, and then the bicep is gonna go towards the elbow. So it creates this really, really thin point where it doesn't feel solid. But if you look at your anatomy, if you look at your references, very often you're gonna see this red block right here that is gonna connect everything upwards. And then what your flow suggests at that point, oops, is that with your forearm, the forearm is connected upwards. And now you don't have any point in your anatomy where you have this weakness point, this little point where everything connects. And so it's just a principle of solidity in your anatomy, in your form, that if you want to make something feel solid, you need to avoid having flows all connect at a certain point. And I'm sure we can find a reference where this is the case. Um, let's take this one. And flow is like such a print. It's like if you get really good at creating beautiful flows, everything just feels so good in your sculptures. Sculptors that are really good at making proper flows, it's like the form feels coherent and it's really elegant in its form. So we can see the forearm is almost just a really simple block that we can see here. And then we're adding this other flow right here that connects the arm to the forearm. So we have this second flow that connects the forms together. And then we have our arm right here. So having those three flows together avoids having a simple forearm, and having a point where it feels like it could break. Let's see if we have another one. You see again, classical issue would be to take our flow right here and make it go right there and have a big crease, and then having something that doesn't feel solid anymore. Just by adding another flow here, now we have something that feels solid. So again, flow is about the direction of your form, how it wraps around, and then when you put them together, how they merge all together. And so this is just in the creation, how you place your blocks together and how you put them. It has a huge influence on how you feel your form and how solid it looks and the directionality. If you want your arm to feel connected, then the whole form should flow together. If you add a form that goes sideways, then you're not gonna feel that connection in the arm anymore. So even if we added this flow right here that goes from the back to the front, we still have this direction to the arm that always flows downwards. And so that makes the whole arm feel connected together. So this is just in the placement of your forms. And then once it's placed, you have to create a transition between your forms. You have to place them, and then you need to choose where it connects, where you lose that form. And so again, if we, this might not be the best example. Let's use this one. This is pretty close to what my diagram shows. So in here, we can see this would be something like the green block, and then you would have the blue block, and then you have the red block over here. Now, it's very, very clear where this red block starts right here. But very soon, you lose it right from here. Where is that red block anymore? I'm not sure. It becomes the blue block really, really quickly. So you need every single flow, every single form has a core and it has a transition space. And so you can see this red block has its core right here where we say, oh, okay, this is a form. And then starting here, we're losing that form we're losing the red block into the green block. And so here we have a transition space into the other block. And same thing here. We get downwards and then we have a transition space. And so even if our transition is very, very soft and we can't really feel that red block anymore, we can still feel the flow and we can still see it in the shadow right here that we're having the influence of this red block on our form. So it's extremely subtle, but over here we still feel that the red block is somewhere there. We're not blocking in a muscle, we're blocking in a gesture in our form that is influencing how we see the form. So this is pretty quickly flow. So when we're gonna start sculpting, we're gonna think all the time about flow, and I'm gonna try to critique the work we did before in terms of flow and how we can improve it. It's the easiest way to observe a flow is by looking at the silhouette and by looking at the spaces where its core is really, really strong. So that's flow. Now amplitude um, is this idea that form have a certain strength to them, and there's a relationship between small forms and big forms and how they go on top of each other, how they layer each other, and how I how I tried to break it down is a bit the idea of primary form, secondary form, and tertiary forms. So when you're looking at a human, you're gonna have your big blocks, and then every single block that you create, you can make them into, you can separate them in smaller chunks, and again, you can separate them in smaller chunks. Um, Now, when we think of, at first, when I started sculpting, I would think, let's say this, I'm not sure how I could draw this graph, but let's say this is a chart of like the intensity of each form. I would think, let's say this is primary, secondary, tertiary. I would think, okay, this is the primary forms, they're like really intense, and then we have the secondary forms, they're like a bit less intense, and it's like gradually going downwards like this. But depending on your reference, you're gonna see that the relationship between primary form, secondary form, and tertiary form is not necessarily this gradual gradient. Like, I find a lot of the time in humans, you're gonna have very strong primary forms that you can feel, and then it's gonna look something like this. You're gonna have much smaller secondary form and much smaller tertiary forms. Again, it's it's a bit of the concept of primary form, secondary form, and tertiary form, I think, is a bit hard to understand for people because like you can you can break tertiary forms in primary, secondary, and tertiary. Like there's no such thing as, okay, well, this is clearly a primary form. You can, it's it. There's no arbitrary way of seeing what a primary form is or what a secondary form is. So the important thing about this concept is that there needs to be a hierarchy in your form of which one is the big one, which one is goes on top, and how do you layer those forms? And you're gonna see if you watch two different references, they have a different hierarchy of forms. So we can see this one has really, really strong big shapes. You know, you can see like it's very clear that you have big shapes. Let's try to separate it. Like I can see very clearly, like I can block out big forms that are easy to see. And then on top of that, I don't see much really, you know, I pretty much only see those big forms. I pretty much only see this and then this, you know. It's it's big forms and then there's not much else. If we look at the other reference over here, now we have big shape, big shape again, but now I'm starting to see a lot more shapes in there that break up our surface much more information. So form language is also about that every single form is different. There's different accents, people speak differently, and it's the same thing in artists, you know, every artist has their style and it's kind of like an accent in the way they speak. They speak differently. And again, this has a different set of amplitudes of how the forms layer each other. So, um, maybe I can go and look at like old work and try to see what we could improve from it in terms of flow and oh no, let's go through identity first. So flows and amplitudes are really the tools you use to make up your form. So I'm gonna create a form. It's gonna have a certain direction. It's gonna be based on what I'm trying to create. So how it goes. I'm trying to create an arm, so it's gonna go in that direction and this and that. And since I'm creating a bunch of different forms, at some point I need to make sense of them. I need to make sure that they have a certain amplitude that is respected. So I need to make sure that um, I'm not lost in a confusion of a bunch of forms. You know, it makes sense. Like, okay, this is my block, and I can separate it in this smaller block, and I can do this and that. So that's I like I don't complicate my life. This is two mindsets that I put myself in to create my forms. Now, identity is always in the back of my mind. It's what is creating this form? Why am I creating this flow? And how can I make this be respected? So what is every single like form language you're gonna see, skin is gonna have its own form language. As we said before, tendons, muscle, bones have their own form language. And so having an idea of what you're actually trying to sculpt is gonna influence what you create. And so when I'm sorry, if I'm if I'm sculpting, I'm gonna try to think, okay, this is a muscle, so how am I gonna shape it? This is a bone, so I'm gonna shape it differently. It's partly anatomy, trying to know what you're actually creating, but it's also, it goes further than that because you're also trying to create fat, which you don't really study in anatomy. You're trying to create veins. You're trying to think, is this an old person? Is this a young person? How is it going to react depending on this? So there's a lot more than anatomy to be studied to try to create appealing sculptures. So this is something that's always in the back of my mind, and I'm sure we're gonna get to talk about it when we get into Zbrush and we're trying to create this. So let's this, as we said, was one of my old work. Let's try to see what is working and what is not working. Probably more not working than working. So um let's bring a couple references beside this to try to understand what went wrong in my mind at that moment. So let's bring those two. Maybe we can bring this as well. All right. So I think I think a big problem with this, first of all, is at first when we make forms, we sculpt the form and then we smooth all sides. And so we don't really have what we talked about with a flow, where we have a form and we have a transition space and a core. So we can see pretty much all forms have the same treatment, that I have my form and it's equally smoothed on all sides. Same thing here. Form, smooth it equally on all sides. Form, smooth it equally on all sides. And so we just get a bunch of bumps everywhere that don't make sense together, and they don't really represent anything. It doesn't really make sense. So if we take is this a good reference? I think, let's say we take a guy like this. He has, when you see this form, you have a really clear, strong dip in here, again here, and then you have a transition space all around that where we lose it. And so when we get here, let's say we take this big form right here, we have strong space and then transition upwards. Now, when I see this, I just see an even transition everywhere. And in the flow itself, we don't really have a start, we don't really have an ending. I just see a big banana. Like just a big banana here. And so if we go back to identity, I can't I can't really feel a rib cage over here and then an oblique. I In my silhouette, I just have something really smooth that doesn't really represent anything. And so same thing over here, you know, I'm sure this was supposed to represent a rib cage. And so let's see if we put a camera from under and we're looking up there, what we would see is bump. Can we make this bigger? We would see a bump right here and then another bump right there. We would see something like this, and then we would see probably another bump and then bump, 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 bump. So that's what there's something like this. We would have something like this, and what we're trying to represent here is that this is a rib cage, and then on top of that, this is probably a muscle. So what we're actually trying to do, we're trying to represent that we have a rib cage, so a solid plane, and on top of that, you add muscle pieces. And this is the end of my rib cage, let's say, and then you would have other muscles or something like this. So what you actually what you're actually sculpting is not this. This is your identity. So this is, let's say, my block of my rib cage. We're still looking at under. I'm not sure if this is clear, but we're looking under, and then this is rib cage, and then on top of that we have a muscle, and then on top of that you're gonna have skin. So what you're sculpting is this layer of skin. But what you're thinking about is the rib cage and the muscle and this other muscle. And you can see in references, let's take this one. This is pretty clear. Look how clear it is that you have a solid plane here. You have, like, clearly this is super flat. You have a flat plane here, and it keeps going upwards because it's the rib cage, right? So you have this solid plane, and then on top of that, you have your muscles. So you can feel in the form solid plane, and then directly on top, you have something. So you have something flat, and then it bulges. If we look at the same area in mine, what you have here is you have, well, first of all, you don't really have anything flat, but it goes inwards right here, and then you have the our muscle. So what you're seeing is bump and then bump, and this is just the way we sculpt. You know, when we first start, we just put a bunch of clay buildup, and then we smooth, and then we damn standard this, and then we put another muscle, so we end up with like a bunch of bubbles everywhere that don't mean much. And so this, I think this would be the biggest issue in terms of flow. And then in terms of amplitude, well, we can see that again they all have the same idea of the bubble, and on top of that we can see the lines that we created with our brush that just creates this layer of really a unclear, like I guess I'm not sure if it was meant to give a skin quality or it was just like a leftover. um but we have an issue seeing big forms and then smaller forms. We don't feel the big blocks of the rib cage and then see stuff on top. You know, we just see a bunch of shapes on top of each other. And so that was for the first one. If we go quickly over the second one, I think this was I forgot what we said before, but this was like 2 years later. So already we have an improvement. We're starting to have certain flows. I'm starting to see, oh, okay, this guy is creating an overlap here. Oops. Like we have this overlapping this, so already we have a mention of flows. You know, we can see a strong dip here and then kind of a transition space. I think the biggest problem with this sculpture is trying to have amplitude, trying to control our form. So we can see, yes, we have something like a big shape here, but we still have a bunch of very strong, smaller shapes on top, which makes the readability really, really hard in that form. Um, so if we tone down all of these strong shapes, it would make it really much more clear. And personally, that's what I call a dirty shape. It's just, it's a shape that wasn't like I was not able at that time to create a shape that had a clear form to it. I would just make a bunch of brush strokes and then I wasn't able to make it nice and controlled. So I think that's it for our first introduction to the form language. Um, I'm not sure how long was this? 30 minutes? Okay. Um, so let's digest this. Let's look quickly at our at what we did, how we can improve it, and then I think I'm gonna separate the video in two. We're gonna have this is gonna be the theory part, and we're gonna have a second video where I'm gonna take my time and we're gonna take all of this information and put it in ZBrush. So also, like, this is the tools I use in ZBrush, but you're gonna see with time you're gonna have a bunch of, with your observations, you're gonna create rules in your mind about what you're trying to create. So I wanted to put simplicity in here, which is something I always remember. Like when we, let's say we watch a reference like this for long enough, for me that this is like this is an insult to sculpting, because it's just, it's so simple. It's like, I don't know how to even describe this. Like I'm not sure if this is insulting to you guys, but it just looks like two blocks, and this is like, this is a scan, so this is like photorealistic sculpting right there, but it's so simple, it's so controlled, and this is actually so hard to create, even if it's super simple, super simple. Like it would take someone years to get to that level of sculpting, even if it's like a cylinder. But you can still see like what we talked about before, like really clear flows, clear shapes. The amplitude is so controlled, you know, it's big, 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 big shapes, and then you don't have much apart from low places, right, where you have strong small shapes over here. But in that area, beautiful contrast too. Like over here, really strong primary shapes, and over here then you have your secondary and a lot of tertiary here. So you have areas that have really strong secondary tertiaries and areas that have only your simple blocking. And so this is a beautiful example of, like, it doesn't need to be complicated to speak really clearly and just look awesome. So like, I'm always trying to think again of simplicity, because we always make it really complicated. Oh, we need to put all of these muscles, we need to put all of this. Look at this, like you don't see anything. It's just, this is a squarish shape, and then over here we have like everything is so clear. It's, look how simple this, like this is This is cut version of the arm. Like, look at this outline. So simple. You don't have a bunch of bumps everywhere with like, oh, this big muscle and this and that. So I'm not sure if I'm gonna talk about all of the principles that I gathered over the years. Um, but for sure you're gonna stumble upon a bunch of them. So let's look quickly at what we did and how we can improve it. Let's bring a couple of references with us. Let's bring this one, this one. What else? Might be okay. So when we look at our blocking, um, for now, we still have that issue, the same issue as this guy right here, where our form is really dirty. So let's put it like this. So when we look, if we look at this forearm right here, you can see in the shadow shape how dirty it is. Like, this is our shadow shape right here. It's incoherent, it's a mess, it's hard to understand. So it tells you how many little bumps you have on that shape that don't really make sense. I would hope to end up with something not as soft as this, but something as clear as this, where look at this shadow shape, how clean it is and how soft it is. So this is this is a problem of me not being able to control my form well enough. So we're gonna go back in ZBrush and show how we can really control that form and make sure that it looks really nice. If we look at our flow right now in this combination of shapes, we have in our flow, I can see a pretty much a straight line right here. Now, what I don't like about this is that the shape of our bicep is this flow right here, and then we have a tendon that goes in this direction. So what my the identity is telling me, this is a bicep and this is the tendon of my bicep. So I would expect my flow to be continuous between my bicep and its tendon. I would hope to have some sort of straight line right here. But this is not what we have right now. We have a straight line when we combine it with another muscle right here. So I'm gonna try to change my flow to have the bicep be continuous with the tendon. And when as I keep observing this flow, first of all, we can see that it's really, again, the flow itself is dirty. Like, let's look close enough. You can see, oh, I don't want to erase this. Um, you can see that we have the bicep and then we have a really soft transition. I would hope to have a transition that is a bit stronger. And then actually, it's not a straight line. It goes outwards again and then it goes up. So it's really hard to understand what is happening in here. I would expect to have again a difference. Okay, this is the end of my bicep and then I have a straight line going into the arm and I have a separate flow going here. I would expect to have a sharp crease over here. But right now, we just have like a soft transition in our flow, and this is not working. We can see here what is saving this is having a crease. So there's a crease in the arm that is creating this really sharp transition space between the two, and it separates the both of them, and it's super efficient, so I'm probably gonna do the same. I'm gonna put a crease right here, and we're gonna be able to have straight and then our flow right here. So we could do this analysis about every single space in our flow, what we want to have. I won't do it because it's gonna take hours, but Something that I want to point out is I really like spaces like these, um, of bones that protrude, and we just feel that sharp nature. Like this is hard. Like I can feel that I can tap on this with my finger and it's gonna be hard. In this scope for now, it's a bit hard to see which parts are hard when we hit it and which parts are soft. So I'm gonna try to have my bones feel a bit harder, and um, spaces like these feel a bit softer. Um, Again, this is identity, like which parts are soft, which parts are hard, and like which parts have this quality of like a little saggy skin. So I'm gonna try to define a form language to every single area. So I'm gonna try to respect the tendon form language, so this feels like a guitar string. You know, having something wobbly like this makes me think that it's not that tensed, really. It's like a wobbly string. But if we have a straight line, then it's like, ooh, okay, yeah, this is really tensed. So I'm gonna try to respect that form language. Same thing for here, define a form language that make us feel that it's hard. And by having peaks in our silhouette, we're gonna be able to define that space. So let's let's stop right here. I'm gonna go eat and then let's come back to sculpt this. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Ciao ciao.